She found a baby in the school bathroom and brought it home. The reason why will break your heart. The small, two-story house on Elm Street in Mill Creek, Pennsylvania, held a silence that was heavier than any noise. It wasn't the peaceful silence of contentment, but the tense, suffocating quiet of unspoken resentments and simmering anger. America Thompson, at 32, felt the weight of that silence pressing down on her, a constant reminder of her perceived failures. Her husband, Robert, was a man of rigid expectations and deeply ingrained traditions. They were both second-generation immigrants, their families having come from a small village in a country where sons were prized above all else. While Robert had embraced many aspects of American life, he ran a successful auto repair shop, spoke fluent English, and enjoyed his Sunday football. He clung fiercely to the patriarchal values of his upbringing. The birth of their first daughter, Rubina, had been met with a forced smile and a thinly veiled disappointment. Robert had named her, somewhat dismissively, after a character in an old family story, a woman known more for her beauty than her strength. 2 years later, when their second daughter, Sarah, arrived, Robert's disappointment was palpable. He barely looked at the baby, turning his attention instead to the endless stream of male relatives who came to offer their condolences, as if the birth of another girl was a tragedy to be mourned. America loved her daughters fiercely. She saw their intelligence, their kindness, their potential, but she also saw the way Robert's disapproval shadowed their lives, the way it chipped away at their self-esteem. She tried to compensate, to shower them with extra affection, to shield them from their father's coldness. But it was never enough. Robert's mother, Eleanor, who lived with them, reinforced his views. Eleanor was a formidable woman, her life etched with hardship and a strict adherence to tradition. She saw America as a weak and inadequate wife, constantly reminding her of her duty to produce a male heir. A woman's worth is measured by the sons she bears, Eleanor would say, her voice sharp and critical. You have failed twice. You must try again. The pressure was relentless. Every month, America would dread the arrival of her period, knowing that it would bring another round of recriminations, another wave of disappointment from Robert and Eleanor. She felt like a failure, a broken vessel, unable to fulfill the one purpose they deemed important. The abuse was mostly verbal, a constant barrage of criticism and belittlement. Robert would call her lazy, stupid, useless. He would compare her unfavorably to other women in their community, women who had been blessed with sons. He would ignore her, refusing to speak to her for days, making her feel invisible and worthless. Occasionally, the abuse turned physical. A shove, a slap, a grip on her arm that left bruises. It always happened in private, away from the eyes of their daughters. Robert would justify it as discipline, a way to correct her behavior. America learned to be silent, to absorb the blows, to protect her daughters from witnessing the worst of it. She had considered leaving many times. But where would she go? She had no money of her own, no job skills beyond her high school education. Her mother, Mary, lived nearby and offered emotional support, but her small apartment could barely accommodate herself, let alone America and 2 children. And deep down, America still held onto a flicker of hope, and naive belief that things might change, that Robert might somehow see her, and their daughters, for who they truly were. She stayed, trapped by fear, obligation, and a love for her children that was stronger than anything else. Rubina Thompson, at the tender age of 10, carried a weight far heavier than her school books. She was a bright, observant child, with a quick mind and a sensitive heart. She understood, far more than her parents realized, thin-spoken tensions and simmering resentments that filled their home. School was her refuge, a place where she could escape the suffocating atmosphere of her house and immerse herself in the world of books and learning. She excelled in all her subjects, particularly English and history. She loved to read, devouring stories of strong women, of heroines who overcame adversity and achieved great things. These stories fueled her imagination and gave her a sense of hope, a glimpse of a world beyond the confines of Mill Creek. But even at school, she felt a sense of isolation. Many of the other children came from families that mirrored the traditional values of her own. The boys were often favored, their achievements celebrated, while the girls were expected to be quiet and obedient. Robina struggled to fit in, to reconcile the progressive ideas she encountered in her books with the rigid expectations of her community. She had a few close friends, girls who also felt like outsiders, who shared her love of reading and her yearning for something more. They would meet in the library, whispering secrets and sharing dreams, creating a small, safe space for themselves amidst the pressures of their lives. But the heaviest burden Robina carried was the knowledge of her mother's suffering. She witnessed the daily indignities, the verbal abuse, the occasional physical violence. She saw the sadness in her mother's eyes, the way her shoulders slumped with weariness. She heard the muffled sobs at night, the whispered prayers for a better life. She also felt the sting of her father's disapproval. She knew he loved her, in his own way, but it was a conditional love, overshadowed by his disappointment that she wasn't a boy. He rarely spoke to her, rarely acknowledged her achievements. He focused his attention on sports, on activities he considered masculine, leaving Robina and her younger sister, Sarah, feeling like unwanted afterthoughts. 7-year-old Sarah, with her bright, bubbly personality, was largely oblivious to the darker currents of their family life. She adored her father, clinging to him whenever he was home, seeking his attention and affection. Robina envied Sarah's innocence, her ability to live in the moment, and burdened by the weight of their family's problems. Robina felt a fierce protectiveness towards both her mother and her sister. She tried to shield Sarah from the worst of their father's moods, distracting her with games and stories. She tried to be a buffer between her parents, to diffuse tense situations, to somehow make things better. But deep down, she felt helpless. She was just a child, powerless to change the dynamics of her family. She yearned for a way to fix things, to make her mother happy, to earn her father's love and approval. She started to believe, with a child's naive logic, that if only she could give her father what he wanted as son, then everything would be all right. This thought, this desperate hope, began to consume her, shaping her actions in ways she couldn't fully understand. It was a heavy burden for a young girl to carry, a burden that would soon lead her to make a life-altering decision. The day that changed everything began like any other. Robina woke up early, helped Sarah get ready for school, and tried to avoid her father, who was already in a foul mood. The air in the house was thick with tension, the silence punctuated by Eleanor's sharp comments about America's incompetence in the kitchen. At school, Robina tried to focus on her lessons, but her mind kept wandering back to her home, to her mother's sad eyes. During recess, she overheard a group of older girls whispering about a student who had been rumored to be pregnant. The girls were speculating about who the father was, about what would happen to the girl, about the shame she would bring to her family. Robina listened, her heart pounding. An idea, a desperate, ill-conceived plan, began to form in her mind. She remembered the stories she had read, the tales of abandoned babies, of foundlings who brought joy to childless couples. She thought about her father's longing for a son, about her mother's suffering. During lunch break, Robina slipped away from the cafeteria, her heart racing. She knew it was wrong, but she felt a desperate urgency, a need to do something to fix her broken family. She went to the girls' bathroom, a large, echoing space with rows of stalls and a lingering smell of disinfectant. And there, in the corner stall, tucked behind the toilet, she found him. A tiny baby boy, wrapped in a thin, worn blanket, his face red and wrinkled, his eyes squeezed shut. He was crying, a weak, pitiful sound that pierced Robina's heart. For a moment, she just stared, her mind reeling. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was like something out of one of her books, a surreal, unbelievable moment. Then, the reality of the situation hit her. This was a real baby, a living, breathing human being, abandoned and alone. She felt a surge of compassion, a fierce protectiveness, that overwhelmed her fear. She carefully picked up the baby, cradling him in her arms. He was so small, so vulnerable. He stopped crying, his tiny hand grasping her finger. In that moment, Robina made a decision. She would take him home. She would give her father the son he so desperately wanted. She would save her mother from his anger. She knew it was a crazy idea, a dangerous idea, but she couldn't leave him there. She couldn't abandon him the way his mother had. She wrapped him more securely in the blanket, hiding him under her jacket. She slipped out of the bathroom, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She avoided the other students, the teachers, making her way out of the school building and onto the street. The walk home was a blur. She kept the baby close, shielding him from the wind, whispering soothing words to him. She didn't think about the consequences, about what would happen when she got home. She only focused on the baby, on keeping him safe, on the desperate hope that he would somehow mend her broken family. As she approached her house, she saw her father's truck parked in the driveway. Her stomach churned with a mixture of fear and determination. She took a deep breath, clutched the baby tighter, and walked through the front door, ready to face whatever awaited her. The moment America saw Rubina standing in the doorway, clutching something bundled in her jacket, she knew something was wrong. Rubina's face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange and settling determination. "Rubina, what is that?" America asked, her voice sharp with concern. Rubina hesitated, glancing towards the living room where Robert was watching television. Eleanor was in the kitchen, her sharp ears always attuned to any disturbance. "Mom, I need to show you something," Rubina whispered, her voice trembling. "But not here." America, sensing the urgency in her daughter's voice, led her to the small, cramped laundry room at the back of the house. She closed the door, her heart pounding with a growing sense of dread. Rubina slowly unwrapped the blanket, revealing the tiny, sleeping baby boy. America gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She stared at the baby, her mind reeling. Where did you get him?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I found him," Rubina said, her voice choked with emotion. "At school. In the bathroom. He was abandoned." America felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, what her daughter was telling her. This was insane, impossible. "Rubina, you can't just take a baby," she said, her voice shaking. "We have to call the police. We have to." "No," Rubina cried, her eyes filling with tears. "Please, Mom, don't you see? This is our chance. This is what Dad wants. A son. If we have a son, he'll be happy. He'll stop being angry. He'll stop hurting you." America stared at her daughter, her heart breaking. She saw the desperation in Rubina's eyes, the naive hope that this baby, this stolen child, could somehow fix their broken family. She understood the twisted logic, the desperate yearning for love and acceptance that had driven her daughter to this extreme act. But she also knew it was wrong, terribly wrong. They couldn't keep this baby. It was illegal, immoral, and ultimately, it wouldn't solve their problems. "Rubina, honey, I understand," America said, trying to keep her voice calm. "But this isn't the way. We have to tell someone. We have to." "Please, Mom," Rubina pleaded, clutching the baby tighter. "Just for a little while. Let Dad see him. Let him have a son. Please." America was torn. She knew she should call the police immediately, but the look on her daughter's face, the raw desperation in her eyes, stopped her. She couldn't bring herself to crush Rubina's fragile hope, to shatter this illusion she had created. And a small, insidious part of her, a part she hated to admit, felt a flicker of hope herself. Could this baby, somehow, be the answer to their prayers? Could he soften Robert's heart, bring peace to their family? "Okay," she said, her voice trembling. "But just for tonight. We'll hide him at Grandma's house. And tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." It was a reckless decision, a desperate gamble. But in that moment, America couldn't see any other way. She was driven by a mixture of fear, love, and a desperate longing for a miracle. They wrapped the baby in a clean blanket, and America, under the cover of darkness, smuggled him out of the house and to her mother's small apartment a few blocks away. Mary, a kind and compassionate woman, was shocked but understanding. She agreed to help, to keep the baby safe for the night, while America tried to figure out a plan. But as America lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of their secret pressed down on her. She knew this was a temporary solution, a fragile house of cards that could collapse at any moment. The fear of discovery, the fear of Robert's reaction, the fear of the consequences consumed her. She had made a terrible mistake, and she knew deep down that there was no easy way out. The next morning, the storm broke. America had barely slept, tossing and turning, haunted by nightmares and the growing dread of what the day would bring. She was making breakfast, her hands shaking, when the phone rang. It was the principal of Rubina's school, Mr. Harrison. His voice was stern, accusatory. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "we have reason to believe that your daughter, Rubina, may be involved in the disappearance of a newborn baby from the school yesterday." America's blood ran cold. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. What are you talking about?" she stammered, trying to sound confused, innocent. "A student reported seeing Rubina near the girls' bathroom around the time the baby was discovered missing," Mr. Harrison continued. "We have reason to believe she may have taken the child." He then added, his voice dropping to a lower, more insinuating tone, "There have also been rumors, whispers, about Rubina's condition. We need to ascertain the truth, Mrs. Thompson, for the sake of the school's reputation, and for Rubina's own well-being." The implication was clear. They suspected Rubina of being the baby's mother, of hiding her pregnancy, and then abandoning her child. The shame, the scandal, washed over America. "That's ridiculous," America said, her voice rising in anger. "Rubina is a child. She would never." "We're involving the police, Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Harrison interrupted. "They'll be at your house shortly. I suggest you cooperate fully." The line went dead. America stood there, frozen, the phone clutched in her hand. Her worst fears were coming true. She rushed to Rubina's room, waking her daughter and telling her, in hushed tones, what had happened. Rubina's eyes widened with fear, but she didn't deny it. She simply clung to her mother, her body trembling. Robert, awakened by the commotion, stormed into the room, his face thunderous. "What's going on?" he demanded. "What's all this whispering about?" Before America could answer, there was a knock on the door. It was the police. 2 officers, a man and a woman, stood on the porch, their expressions grim. The next few hours were a blur of accusations, denials, and rising tension. The police questioned Rubina, gently at first, then with increasing pressure. They searched the house, their eyes scrutinizing every corner, every closet. Robert, initially furious at the intrusion, became increasingly agitated as the questioning continued. He saw the suspicion in the officers' eyes, the way they looked at Rubina, the implied accusation. His anger shifted, focusing not on America or Rubina, but on the outsiders who dared to question his family's honor. "My daughter is innocent," he roared, his voice booming through the house. "She would never do such a thing. You have no proof. You're accusing her based on rumors, on gossip." He stood protectively in front of Rubina, shielding her from the officer's gaze. It was the first time America had seen him defend their daughter, with such ferocity. "We need to establish the facts, Mr. Thompson," the male officer said calmly. "We need to determine if Rubina is the mother of the missing child. A simple test at the hospital will clear this up." Robert hesitated. The idea of his daughter being subjected to such a test, the implication behind it, was deeply offensive to him. But he also knew that refusing would only make them look more guilty. "Fine," he said, his voice tight with anger. "We'll go to the hospital. We'll prove her innocence. And then I expect an apology from all of you." He turned to America and Rubina, his expression softening slightly. "Come," he said. "We'll face this together." It was a turning point, a moment of unexpected unity. For the first time in years, America felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this crisis could somehow bring them together. But she also knew that the truth, the secret of the baby, was still hanging over them, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. The hospital was a sterile, impersonal environment, filled with the hushed whispers of worried families and the constant beeping of medical equipment. Rubina sat on a chair in the waiting room, her face pale, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. America sat beside her, holding her hand, trying to offer comfort, though her own heart was pounding with fear. Robert paced back and forth, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He kept muttering about lawsuits, about defamation of character, about the incompetence of the school and the police. Finally, a doctor emerged from the examination room, his expression somber. He called Robert and America aside, leaving Rubina in the waiting area. "The tests are conclusive," the doctor said. "Rubina is not the mother of the missing child." Robert let out a sigh of relief, a mixture of vindication and triumph. "I told you," he said, his voice booming. "My daughter is innocent. Now, where is this principal? I want an apology." But the doctor held up a hand. "There's more," he said. "While we were running the tests, we also did a routine blood typing. It appears that, well, it appears that Rubina is not your biological daughter, Mr. Thompson." The words hung in the air, heavy and shocking. Robert stared at the doctor, his face turning ashen. What are you saying?" The doctor explained, carefully and methodically, about blood types, about genetic markers, about the impossibility of Robert being Rubina's biological father. America felt a cold dread wash over her. This was a truth she had buried deep, a secret she had carried for years. A brief, reckless affair, a moment of weakness and loneliness early in her marriage, had resulted in Rubina's conception. She had never told Robert, terrified of his reaction, of the consequences. Robert stared at America, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief, betrayal, and a growing, terrifying rage. "Is this true?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. America couldn't speak. She could only nod, tears streaming down her face. The carefully constructed facade of their family, already cracked by the events of the past few days, shattered completely. Robert's anger exploded, a volcanic eruption of fury and pain. He stormed out of the hospital, leaving America and Rubina alone with the weight of their shattered world. The police, informed of the test results, cleared Rubina of any involvement in the baby's disappearance. The principal, Mr. Harrison, offered a stammering, insincere apology, more concerned with the school's reputation than with the emotional devastation he had caused. America and Rubina returned home, to an empty house. Robert was gone. The silence, once filled with unspoken resentments, was now thick with a different kind of pain, the pain of betrayal, of loss, of a family torn apart. The baby, still hidden at Mary's apartment, was a forgotten detail in the midst of this larger, more devastating revelation. The focus had completely shifted, from the foundling child to the broken bonds of the family itself. This section needs to be handled with extreme care. Robert's transformation can't be instant or unbelievable. It needs to be a gradual process, driven by internal conflict and the undeniable love he does have for his daughters, even if it's been buried under layers of anger and disappointment. After storming out of the hospital, Robert drove aimlessly for hours, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Betrayal, anger, humiliation, and a deep, gnawing sense of loss battled within him. He had built his life, his identity, on a foundation of lies. The daughter he had believed to be his was not. The wife he had treated with disdain had deceived him for years. He ended up at a bar, a place he rarely frequented, seeking solace in the bottom of a bottle. But the alcohol didn't numb the pain, it only amplified it, blurring the edges of his rage, making him even more volatile. He thought about Rubina, about her intelligence, her kindness, her unwavering love for her mother. He remembered the way she had looked at him, even when he was at his worst, with a mixture of fear and a desperate longing for his approval. He remembered her words, the night before, about bringing the baby home to make him happy, to stop him from hurting her mother. A wave of shame washed over him. He had been so blinded by his obsession with having a son, with upholding his twisted sense of tradition, that he had failed to see the precious gifts he already had. He had pushed away his daughters, treated his wife with cruelty, all in pursuit of a phantom ideal. He thought about America, about the years of silent suffering she had endured. He had blamed her for his unhappiness, for his perceived failures, when all along, she had been carrying a secret, a burden, that was far heavier than anything he had ever experienced. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that he was the root of their problems. His anger, his controlling nature, his obsession with tradition, had poisoned their family, driving Rubina to a desperate act of love and creating a chasm of fear and mistrust between them all. He left the bar, the alcohol still burning in his gut, but his mind clearer than it had been in years. He drove to his mother's apartment, knowing that America and Rubina would likely be there. He found them sitting on the couch, huddled together, their faces streaked with tears. The baby, Abdullah, was asleep in a makeshift crib in the corner of the room. Mary was nowhere to be seen, likely giving them space. The sight of them, so vulnerable and broken, pierced his heart. He stood in the doorway, his anger replaced by a profound sense of remorse. Rubina looked up, her eyes filled with fear. America flinched, her body tensing, as if expecting a blow. Robert took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in his voice. I need to talk to you, he said. He sat down, not on the couch beside them, but in a chair across the room, creating a distance that felt both necessary and agonizing. He didn't apologize, not yet. He couldn't. The words felt inadequate, hollow. Instead, he started to talk, haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency, about his own upbringing, about the pressure he had felt to conform to tradition, about his own insecurities and fears. He spoke about his father, a stern and yielding man who had valued strength and dominance above all else. He spoke about his own failures, his own struggles to live up to those impossible expectations. He admitted, for the first time, that he had been wrong. Wrong to prioritize having a son, wrong to treat his daughters as less valuable, wrong to abuse America, both verbally and physically. The words came out slowly, painfully, wrung from the depths of his soul. He didn't try to justify his actions, didn't try to excuse his behavior. He simply laid bare his flaws, his weaknesses, his regrets. Rubina and America listened in silence, their initial fear gradually giving way to a cautious, fragile hope. They saw, perhaps for the first time, the man beneath the mask of anger and control, the vulnerable, flawed human being struggling with his own demons. Finally, Robert turned his attention to the baby, to Abdullah. He looked at the sleeping infant, his heart aching with a complex mix of emotions. He's a beautiful boy, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Then, he looked at Rubina, his eyes filled with a tenderness she had rarely seen before. You did this for me, he asked, his voice barely a whisper. You brought him home for me. Rubina nodded, tears streaming down her face. I wanted you to be happy, Daddy, she said. I wanted you to stop hurting Mommy. Robert closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of his daughter's love, by the magnitude of his own failures. He reached out, hesitantly, and took Rubina's hand. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice choked with emotion. I'm so sorry for everything. He looked at America, his eyes pleading for forgiveness. He didn't deserve it, he knew, but he hoped, with all his heart, that someday, somehow, he could earn it. He stood and cradling the baby, he said, he is part of this family. He is my son. It was the beginning of a long, difficult journey. But for the first time in years, the silence in the Thompson family was filled not with tension and resentment, but with the fragile promise of healing and hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but they would face it together, a family united not by blood, but by love, forgiveness, and a shared commitment to building a better future. The weeks and months that followed Robert's emotional confession were a period of profound change and adjustment for the Thompson family. The old patterns of behavior, ingrained over years of resentment and abuse, didn't disappear overnight. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and lingering tensions. But there was also a new willingness to communicate, to listen, to understand. Robert started attending therapy, both individually and with America. It was a difficult and painful process, confronting his own demons, acknowledging the harm he had caused, and learning new ways to express his emotions and interact with his family. He began to see how his own upbringing, his own insecurities, had shaped his behavior, and he committed himself to breaking the cycle of abuse. He made a conscious effort to spend time with his daughters, to get to know them as individuals, to appreciate their unique talents and personalities. He started attending Rubina's school events, cheering her on at her academic competitions, praising her artwork. He played with Sarah, building dollhouses and reading her bedtime stories, things he had never done before. He discovered the simple joys of fatherhood, the rewards of connecting with his children on their own terms. He also began to treat America with respect and kindness. He apologized, not just with words, but with actions. He helped with household chores, took on more responsibility for the family's finances, and listened to her concerns without judgment or anger. He started to see her not just as a wife and mother, but as a partner, a friend, a woman with her own hopes and dreams. America, initially hesitant and wary, slowly began to trust him again. She saw the genuine effort he was making, the real change in his behavior. She still carried the scars of the past, the emotional wounds that wouldn't heal overnight, but she was willing to give him a chance, for the sake of her daughters, and for the sake of the fragile hope that their family could be whole again. The arrival of Abdullah, the foundling baby, added another layer of complexity to their lives. Robert, surprisingly, embraced the child wholeheartedly. He took on the role of father with a tenderness and dedication that astonished America. He changed diapers, fed the baby, rocked him to sleep, and spent hours simply holding him, marveling at his tiny features. They named him Abdullah, a name that meant servant of God, a symbol of their gratitude for this unexpected gift. This child who had, in a strange and roundabout way, brought them together. Rubina, initially driven by a desperate need to please her father, found herself genuinely falling in love with the baby. She became his devoted big sister, helping to care for him, singing him lullabies, and showering him with affection. Sarah, too, adored Abdullah, her initial jealousy quickly replaced by a fierce protectiveness towards her new baby brother. The house on Elm Street, once filled with silence and tension, began to echo with laughter, with the sounds of children playing, with the murmur of conversations between husband and wife. It wasn't perfect, not yet. There were still awkward moments, still unresolved issues. But there was also a growing sense of warmth, of connection, of a family slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding itself. The therapy sessions helped, providing a safe space for them to express their feelings, to work through their conflicts, to learn new ways of communicating. They were learning to be a family, not defined by tradition or expectation, but by love and acceptance. While the Thompson family was rebuilding their lives, the search for Abdullah's biological parents continued. The police, having cleared Rubina of any wrongdoing, focused their efforts on identifying the baby's mother. They distributed flyers, contacted local hospitals and shelters, and followed up on every lead, however faint. The story of the abandoned baby made headlines in the local newspaper, attracting widespread attention. The Thompson family was inundated with calls and messages, some offering support, others expressing condemnation. They learned to navigate the public scrutiny, to shield themselves from the negativity, and to focus on the well-being of their family, including the newest, unexpected member. America, with Robert's support, contacted a lawyer specializing in family law. They wanted to understand their options, to explore the possibility of adopting Abdullah if his parents couldn't be found. The legal process was complex and daunting, filled with paperwork, home visits, and background checks. The uncertainty about Abdullah's future cast a shadow over their lives. They loved him as their own, but they knew that at any moment, his biological parents could come forward, claiming him, shattering their newly formed family. They had several close calls. A young woman came forward, claiming to be Abdullah's mother, but DNA tests proved she was lying. Another woman, struggling with addiction and homelessness, seemed like a possible match, but she disappeared before the necessary tests could be conducted. Each time, America and Robert went through an emotional roller coaster, their hopes rising and then crashing, their fear of losing Abdullah intensifying. They tried to shield Rubina and Sarah from the details, but the children were perceptive, sensing the tension and anxiety that permeated their home. Rubina, in particular, struggled with the uncertainty. She had brought Abdullah home, believing he would fix their family. And in a way, he had. But now, she feared losing him, losing the little brother she had come to adore. She started having nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night, crying, convinced that someone was taking Abdullah away. America and Robert reassured her, promising her that they would do everything in their power to keep Abdullah with them. But they also knew that they couldn't make any guarantees. The future was uncertain, and they could only take it one day at a time. They continued to cooperate with the police, providing them with any information they had, however insignificant it might seem. They attended meetings with social workers, navigating the complex web of the child welfare system. They also started to prepare themselves, emotionally, for the possibility that Abdullah might one day leave them. It was a painful process, acknowledging that their love for him might not be enough to keep him. They tried to cherish every moment with him, to create memories that would last a lifetime, regardless of what the future held. The search for Abdullah's parents dragged on, weeks turning into months. The initial flurry of activity subsided, the leads dried up. The case, though still officially open, faded from the headlines, becoming just another unsolved mystery in the files of the Mill Creek Police Department. And as the time passed, a fragile hope began to grow within the Thompson family, the hope that Abdullah might truly, legally, become their own. It was almost a year after Rubina had found Abdullah in the school bathroom that the final resolution came. The police, having exhausted all leads, officially closed the case. The social worker assigned to Abdullah's case informed America and Robert that they could proceed with the adoption process. It was a moment of immense relief and quiet joy. They had been living with uncertainty for so long, fearing the knock on the door, the phone call that would take Abdullah away. Now, they could finally breathe, finally allow themselves to fully embrace him as their son, without reservation. The adoption process was still lengthy and involved, requiring more paperwork, more home visits, more interviews. But this time, it felt different. It felt like a formality, a confirmation of what they already knew in their hearts. Abdullah was their child, and they were his family. Rubina and Sarah were overjoyed. They had been involved in the process as much as possible, attending meetings with the social worker, helping to prepare Abdullah's room, showering him with love and affection. They were excited to officially, legally, become his sisters. The judge approved the adoption. Robert held Abdullah, America and Rubina had their arms around him, while Sarah held the judge's hand. The family was complete. The day they finalized the adoption was a celebration, a small gathering of family and friends at their home on Elm Street. Mary, America's mother, was there, her eyes filled with tears of joy. Eleanor, Robert's mother, was also present, her usual stern demeanor softened by a grudging acceptance of the situation. She had even, surprisingly, whereupon a small blue blanket for Abdullah. The house, once filled with silence and tension, was now alive with laughter, with the chatter of children, with the warmth of a family finally at peace. The scars of the past remained, visible reminders of the pain they had endured. But they were no longer open wounds. They were part of their story, a testament to their resilience, their ability to heal, to forgive, and to love unconditionally. America and Robert, holding Abdullah between them, looked at their daughters, their faces radiant with happiness. They had come through a crucible, a trial by fire that had tested their strength, their love, their very humanity. They had emerged, scarred but whole, a family forged not by blood, but by choice, by forgiveness, and by the unexpected arrival of a tiny, abandoned baby who had changed their lives forever. Abdullah, now a toddler, gurgled and smiled, reaching out to touch Rubina's face. He didn't know the story of his beginnings, the drama that had surrounded his arrival. He only knew the love of his family, the warmth of their embrace, the security of their home. And that, ultimately, was all that mattered. They had found their home, not in a place, but in each other. The weight of expectations, the burden of tradition, the pain of the past, had all been lifted, replaced by the simple, profound joy of a family united, a family healed, a family finally, truly, home.